All right, sit down and strap in because the Gojo agenda is about to go crazy. Spoilers beware. All right, so before we dive in proper, I just want to preface this video a little bit. We are going to be talking about Gojo's comeback, which is something I've talked about for months and months at this point, which is why I'm going to assume that most of you already know the main reasons I think this is going to happen. The different pieces of evidence and foreshadowing that Gege has given us, not only in the manga itself, but also in its promotional materials. So I'm not going to be going over the majority of that again. If you're interested in that, you can check out the old videos. Now, obviously, things have developed as time has gone on, so as of right now, I am still of the mindset that we will get a Gojo comeback, but it'll most likely take the form of a brief window of Gojo coming back, as opposed to like a full-fledged resurrection where he's going to be, living happily ever after. So I wanted to get that out of the way, and now let's dive into kind of what's happening in the manga right now and how this is kind of reframed how I see this happening. Okay, so chapter 263 left us with Sukuna staring down the barrel of a maximum output Jacob's ladder, a position he's been in before. However, the pieces on the board right now set this up in a very interesting way in relation to everything going on with Gojo. So first, let's talk about the actual theming and symbolism behind the Jacob's Ladder curse technique. Alright, so let's be real. Gege was not subtle at all when it came to Angel and the kind of religious implications that that character brings. First of all, their name is Angel. They literally have angel wings and they have a halo, and their curse technique is called Jacob's Ladder. Now, Gege is no stranger to having religious influences on JJK. In fact, the fingerprints are everywhere on this manga. But again, with Angel, it was very on the nose. So let's talk about what Jacob's Ladder actually is, for those of you that aren't familiar. It's a story from the Bible where a man named Jacob falls asleep and has a dream about this ladder, essentially from heaven to the mortal realm, where angels are walking up and down it. It's essentially a path between the afterlife and the world of the living. Now, personally, I don't think Angel is a literal angel of the Christian God or anything like that, but with as heavy-handed as Gege was, I have to think this is intentional and serves a purpose. So perhaps Jacob's Ladder, again, this symbolic connectivity between the world of the living and the dead, could be ushering in Gojo's return. Now, just to be clear here, I'm not saying that Gojo's soul has to literally travel down the Jacob's Ladder as like a conduit to his rebirth. I think it's more of a symbolic thing, but hey, maybe it will for all I know. And the symbolism doesn't stop there, because what you're looking at in this picture is Jacob's Ladder. It's the name given to this phenomena where the sun bounces off the sky. And maybe that looked familiar to some of y'all, maybe from one of the most pivotal moments in JJK, where Gojo comes back from the brink of death, has an awakening, and compares himself to Buddha. And oh yeah, this sunlight effect is also known as Angel's Ladder and Buddha's Rays. And we're still not done, because in Judaism, the story of Jacob's Ladder is said to symbolize 4 exiles before the coming of the Messiah. And this is the 4th instance of Jacob's Ladder, perhaps now ushering in the return of the Messiah. And let's take a look at all of these. The first one was meant to destroy Sukuna, but failed. The second one ushered in the return of Gojo. The third one was meant to kill Sukuna and failed. Perhaps the fourth one will usher in the return of Gojo. Now, why this Jacob's Ladder and not the previous one that Yuta cast in his domain? And that's where the pieces on the board come into play, because things weren't set up then like they are now. Back during Yuta's Jacob's Ladder, you could still get Gojo for half price. He hadn't been stitched up by Shoko yet. Not only is his body now healed, but he's literally in the vicinity on the battlefield, and oh yeah, without a driver in the driver's seat. Yuta is currently collapsed on the ground due to curse technique burnout. The pieces are there for this to make sense. We also have this precedent that Gege has still not paid off, where the previous user of a body has re-exerted control over it. So now with all of that in place, let's take another look at chapter 236 and specifically the airport scene with Gojo after Sukuna beat him. Okay, so first of all, I think we can all agree that the airport is not objective reality. Gojo is much younger and he's surrounded by a bunch of deceased people. So obviously this isn't actually happening, which means something weird has to be going on. And Gojo even compares it to some sort of ridiculous dream. And again, Jacob's Ladder was a dream. But so either this must be some sort of dream, some sort of hallucination, or some version of the afterlife, right? And a lot of people think that, Gojo is passed away and this is him in heaven. Personally, I don't think this is heaven for two big reasons. The first of which, Toji is there. I mean, come on. Hopefully we can all agree that Toji did not go to heaven. And secondly, the fact that it's an airport, and specifically a departure terminal at an airport. This implies that Gojo is about to depart to somewhere. Perhaps that's heaven, perhaps it's some version of the afterlife, but the point is he hasn't yet gone, which leads me to believe this is closer to something like limbo or bardo from Buddhism. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the concept of limbo or bardo, they're basically terms given to this in-between realm, between life and death. And specifically, here's some really interesting information on bardo. It says it is an intermediate state in which the recently deceased experiences various phenomena before being reborn in another state. So perhaps this is what Gojo is going through right now in the airport. Now, excuse me on the pronunciations of this next part, but here's where it gets really interesting. It says the Arhat, which would be Gojo in this case, means somebody that has reached enlightenment. Throughout the heavens and earth, I am the honored one. But even though they have reached enlightenment, they still must ultimately embrace the path of the Bodhisattva while they're in this bardo state. And what does this mean? Well, it essentially means a person who is able to reach nirvana, but delays doing so out of compassion to save others. And what happens once they do that? Well, they obtain a, not even going to try, rapture body and are reborn in a lotus in a transitory state of existence. And if y'all have seen my other Gojo videos, then you already know about all of the lotus symbolism, including in this very chapter, in this airport scene. There are specifically 7 lotuses, which again, not only represent rebirth, but have very specific symbolism with the Buddha, who took 7 steps north and a lotus bloomed in each one. And oh yeah, north. I wonder if that's important. Well, as we all know, this entire afterlife sequence is building up to and hinges on this philosophical question about North versus South that Nanami poses to Gojo. He says, if you'd like to become somebody new, go north. If you'd like to return to who you once were, go south. And obviously the meaning goes much deeper than just choosing a cardinal direction. Nanami references this in his own death, where he saw Haibara, which is kind of a similar, perhaps Bardo-esque situation. Obviously not quite the same, but it is relevant that he saw one of his deceased friends, right? And he even mentions it seems curses can become fuel for new life, the same way sorcery can. But essentially what he said is, I chose to go south because I ultimately was happy with where I was, who I was, and my place in the world. Now, this isn't to say that Nanami could have chosen north and would have resurrected somehow. It's not like that much of a one-to-one. The point is, Nanami was happy with who he was and decided to pass on peacefully given the circumstance. And actually there's another really interesting parallel between Nanami and Gojo, where in Nanami's final moments we can kind of see him facing this dilemma of going north versus south, where he sees Haibara and initially doesn't want to say anything to Yuji. He says, I don't want to curse him, but then ultimately he accepts it, goes south, accepts who he is happy with it, and passes the torch on to Yuji, saying, you've got it from here. Now Gojo is at this exact same juncture. He is similarly faced with a question. Do I go south, happy with who I am, and I pass on, leaving everything else to Yuji and the younger students, right? Or do I go north, become somebody new, and return like the Bodhisattva because of compassion for others, delay my own enlightenment by coming back, realizing who I truly am supposed to be, and becoming that person? Now, why does Gojo need to become somebody new? This is something I've talked about a lot, so I'm only going to give the nutshell version here. But Gojo has never known who he was. That is the crux of his entire narrative arc, encapsulated by this moment and this line from Geto. Are you the strongest because you're Gojo, or are you Gojo because you're the strongest? He spent his entire life trying to figure this out and never quite did because nobody could understand him. They viewed him as, above everyone else, as something else, as the strongest. And this identity crisis of Gojo's and his mischaracterization by his peers was literally a highlight and emphasis in this airport scene. As we can see here, Nanami even says, you never cared about keeping sorcery going or protecting people. You were in it for self-satisfaction. And that has some truth to it, but it's certainly not entirely true, right? But people don't understand Gojo, and he doesn't really have a grasp on himself. So of course it's going to be even harder for other people to see see it, but this isn't the only mischaracterization here. Because even Geto, the person he was closest to in life and the person who had the best understanding of Gojo, mischaracterizes him. Because Gojo right before this says, "I had fun. Sukuna wasn't able to give me his all though, and I think that's a damn shame." And Geto says, "Well, at least you feel satisfied." And Gojo says, "Satisfied, huh?" Because he wasn't satisfied. That wasn't the point he was saying. And then he goes on to say, "I guess my only disappointment is that you weren't there to give me a slap on the back." His disappointment wasn't that he didn't win, which you would think would be the disappointment of somebody who didn't care about others and only cared about his own entertainment and strength. No, his disappointment was that his friend wasn't there. The person who did understand him the most wasn't able to share that moment with him. So if Gojo were faced with this question, would he choose to go south, happy with who he was? No, because he never fully realized that. So if he was presented with an opportunity to return, again, like the Bodhisattva, in order to help those who are suffering, his students, and a chance to truly fight for what is really meaningful to him, others, would he do that? Would he become somebody new? Would he go north? I think yes. And again, the fact that this takes place in an airport with a departing plane and a pivotal question of which way are you going, north or south, the whole thing begs an answer from Gojo. And this entire experience was transformative for him. He had these self-realizations that he needed. The same way in Bardo, you are subject to various phenomena in order to prepare you for the rebirth. Gojo comes in thinking it's a ridiculous dream, but by the end of it, he's hoping it's not. And in my opinion, that change of heart isn't because he just hopes he can stay here forever. Again, it's an airport. It invokes departure to somewhere. I think it's instead because he's realized who he is and wants a chance to actually do something about it. And not for nothing, they even go out of their way to show us shots of the empty airport. And for those of you that don't know where this is from the 12-hour Gojo video promoting Volume 26 that was about his entire life. Now, why show us shots of an empty airport and why end the video with it? It's to show us that a decision was made. Whether it was north or whether it was south, Gojo chose and he has now departed from this place. And you know what? If Gojo does go north and leave his friends, then he can get that pat on the back from Geto as he departs. And how satisfying would that be? And still not done, because there's one more thing I want to talk about in this airport scene, and that's the fact that Gojo brings up that he never told Megami about his dad, a piece of unfinished business that is yet to be resolved. And yes, he does say, "I asked Shoko to handle that," so that could be Gege just crossing that off his to-do list as far as hanging plot threads, but I don't think so, because I don't think that is important enough to bring up right here when he could have brought it up later. He could have just had Shoko tell Megami after the fact, "Hey, Gojo wanted me to tell you this," and then we could have a whole flashback, right? But Gege brings it up here because it's something on Gojo's mind in this Bardo limbo state. It's unfinished business, right? So that's another reason he needs to return, especially given everything that's going on with Megami right now. Gojo may be the one to help pull Megami out of that darkness as his surrogate father. Come on, you just know one more pep talk would go extremely hard. But anyways, y'all, that's my thoughts on it. I know I was yapping a lot there, so I'm going to give you guys some breathing room to process, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Now, again, I want to kind of temper expectations here because me personally, I don't see Gojo like fully coming back living normally. Now, maybe he could, like I'd say that's certainly on the table, but for my money, I see of it more as a quick chance for him to, again, go north, realize who he truly is, and help those people one last time before he moves on. So how long is that? I mean, I don't know. Could it be 30 seconds? Could it be 4 hours? I don't know. I just don't see it being an ultimately permanent thing, but we'll have to see. So let me know y'all's thoughts, and just about 24 hours till leaks, so maybe we'll find out.